The reading is taken from St. Luke's Gospel, chapter 15, beginning to read at verse 11, the parable of the lost son. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here am I, starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back, safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a younger goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' Here ends the reading.
The story we've just heard is often referred to as the lost son or the prodigal son. And interestingly enough, Jesus doesn't give it a title. And if I were to rename it, I might call it the Father's love, the Father's welcome, the Father's heart, which is what we're talking about today in our service. Because the pivotal character in this is not the son, the younger son or the older son, it's the Father. And Jesus here is wanting to tell the people around him. Imagine the Jewish fathers, the Jewish sons, women around the place, but a lot of men gathered around, Jewish men, to hear what Jesus was saying. And he was wanting to paint a picture of his Father, the Father he knew, to communicate to them what he was really, really like. And he sets this up in such a clever way because he makes this younger son into such a reprobate, or reprobate should I say. He is doing 3 things that totally bring shame on a family, to a Jewish father. First of all, he takes his full inheritance with him, which is simply kind of saying, Father, it's as if you've died already. I'm not really interested in honouring you. And often in that society, more often than not, the family would still live together. And as the father got old, the children would be, and the sons, encouraged to honour their father by looking after him. None of this. And then maybe if he'd taken his inheritance, he might have done something good with it. But no, he squanders the whole thing and he ends up penniless and destitute. And then to cap it all, Jesus adds the detail that he then ends up in another country, assuming a kind of Gentile context, where he's having to feed the pigs to earn some kind of living. And of course, that was deeply dishonouring and shaming in that culture because pigs were considered unclean. So he's got to the bottom of the pile, and Jesus paints this picture as he goes on of this son, and everybody's going, oh my goodness, that is so shameful. And the son comes to the point where he realizes his only hope is to go back home. So he starts to rehearse what he's going to say to his father when he sees him. And we realize here that the son is thinking of his father's response. And so he begins to work up this kind of apology and what he's going to expect his father to want to do. So he says, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. I've sinned. And basically saying, don't call me your son anymore because I know you won't want to do that. And then he says, treat me like one of your hired men. Because a hired man could be dismissed at any time. He wasn't fed by the family. If you were a servant, you were part of the household. And he says, no, the lowest level, if I can possibly crawl back and my father might even accept me as a hired hand. So he gets this ready to speak to his father. And this is a point I just want to pause us for a moment, because in my work as a counsellor, you realise that people's fathering and mothering does shape how they feel in life to come, and how authority figures, they can put that kind of experience of their parenting onto authority figures. And often we do that with God, and I come across that again and again. And if I can put a sort of caricature of what we think about sometimes when we're approaching God, it's something like this. It's like getting your report and seeing in red capital letters, "See me," to the headmaster. And so you go in fear and trepidation to the door and you knock the door, really concerned and worried. And he takes time, he doesn't say come in straight away, just to make you stew. And then he says, come in, and you walk in and you see his deep disappointment. And he says, what have you got to say for yourself? And you don't know what to say because you feel such shame and you feel you've failed him, and he gives you a talking to and you walk out of the door, and either you decide you're going to try so hard to please him, so hard to get his approval, or you walk away and think it's not worth trying. I'm such a failure. Well, this is where the son is at. This is what he's thinking his father is going to greet him with. That very image. But of course, Jesus says, no, my father is not like that. And so we come to the parable again. While he was still far off, his father saw him. And I also know in my work that when you work with people who've lost children, that is the worst kind of loss. It's an ache that cannot be attended to, because nothing is like the loss of a child. And Jesus is saying for the father, this is the same experience, to lose his son. And then we see he comes running, very, very undignified in that culture. You can imagine the man going, what? The father running to his son? And he comes running, and it says that he is filled with compassion. And what does he do? He embraces that son. He embraces him and he kisses him. Utterly, utterly what he does not expect. And the son is trying to get out that apology that he's worked up and rehearsed. But the father is not even interested to hear that, because he says, quick, get the servants. Let's get the finest robe. Let's get a ring. Let's put some sandals on him, and let's have a banquet to celebrate. This is the Father's heart. This is the Father that Jesus wants us to know. The Father is so delighted that his Son has returned, and all he can do is embrace him and kiss him. That is the Father that we all want. And Jesus is saying, this is my Father. Jesus in the Gospel of John is always trying to point us to the fact that he and the Father are one. He says in his Gospel, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. If you love me, you love the Father. Everything is about pointing to what his Father is really like. And I just want to end with my own story when I became a Christian. When I was 13, a friend invited me to a church in Cambridge where students had sort of started up a church, really, a really informal church. And I went with her and they asked me if I wanted Jesus to come into my life. And at 13, in a sense, you've got nothing to lose. And I said, yeah. And I remember that. And then they said, did I want the Spirit of God too, the Spirit of Jesus? And I said yes to that. And I do remember after that having the most incredible sense of joy and riding home on my bicycle like sort of 100 feet high with this joy. But one of the people at the church had called Malcolm. I remember his name was Malcolm. Thank you, Malcolm. He gave me a John's Gospel to take home with me. I guess he never thought he might see me again. He'd got no idea whether he would. And he said, take it home and read it. And I remember going up to my room and sitting cross-legged, a young teenager, and I don't think I would have read it all the way through, but I remember settling on this end of John where Jesus is with his disciples in the upper room the night before his crucifixion. And I remember somehow being deeply affected by this, age 13, no theological knowledge, no ability to argue anything, but just taken by this. And what I remember most, and this is also about scripture coming out and speaking to us personally, was these words from Jesus to his disciples. And I'm going to personalize it because it was personalized for me. And Jesus says, if you love me, obey my teaching. And he was coming to me to say, follow me, listen to what I've got to say. And then he says, my Father will love you. My Father will love you. So here he was introducing me to the Father who was loving me too. And it was the next bit that completely bowled me over. And I'm really moved as I even remember it now. And we will come to you. Just like the Father seeing the Son on the hill, coming running to him. Jesus says, me and my Father, we will come to you. And this is the bit. We will make our home with you. Just like the Father who wanted the Son to come back and experience all the joy, the provision, and the celebration of the love of his Father. Jesus was pointing me to that Father in that moment. We all want the Father in this story. That's why it's such an important story that people know. And Jesus says to us now, that is my Father. That's who I am pointing the way to through me. And if you've never known a Father like that, Jesus has come to me, and through me, you can meet that glorious, compassionate, generous, forgiving Father. And if you've been a Christian a long time, and in a way that the older son is a bit like this, you may need a complete revisiting and re-meeting that Father that we have, who wants to embrace you and me in that way and says to you, all that I have is yours. Everything that I have is yours. And I pray that we will have a fresh experience of that Father's embrace. Amen.